Okay, yeah, my name is Stephan Kramer. I'm from the Applied Modeling and Computation group at Imperial College London. This work is joined with people mentioned on top from both Imperial and Queen's Belfast. And this work is part of a Supergen project that looks at the large-scale environmental impact of marine renewable energy farms. Now, because we're interested in large-scale impacts, so changes to the large-scale flow, changes in the current, changes in fish communities, that sort of thing. And typically, these models have to be run for quite a long time to get to answer the questions in these sort of problems. The sort of resolutions that you typically can afford usually means that actually resolving the individual turbines is going to be quite hard. So typically you actually have resolutions that where the individual turbines are not well resolved, and that's one of the things I'm looking at here. So an overview of what I'll talk about. First, quickly talk about the benchmark that we're setting up to compare two models, model Fluidity and Mike. I'll talk a bit more about these two models in a minute. Yeah, I'll be looking at this issue of how do you implement turbines in a very coarse resolution model. And yeah, look at a specific problem where not the right force is applied, and worked out a correction that makes this slightly better. Okay, so Fluidity is a model that we developed in our own group. It's an open source model. It's freely available from the URL on top. And it's been applied to lots of different earth science applications, really ranging from quite small scale problems, so really CFD problems, to large scale oceanographic problems. So yeah, it solves the 3D non-anesthetic Navier-Stokes, but also offers that type of shallow water. And yeah, it's a very flexible framework that offers lots of different numerical techniques. One of which is mesh adaptivity, so it can dynamically adapt the mesh during the run to focus resolution where you need it. And one of the things we're interested in at the moment is developing an optimization framework for farm layouts. So that means automatically optimizing the positioning of turbines within a farm to optimize, so maximize, for instance, energy output or profit, but you could also, for instance, look at minimizing environmental impact or combinations of both. Then Mike, I'm sure a lot of people know this model. Commercial code that's widely used in industry, also by a lot of researchers. Also has 3D and 2D capability, and yeah, a lot of capabilities that are relevant for this application here. Right, so first a bit about the benchmark case that we've been setting up. It's basically meant to be a simplified version of the Strangford law, except that it's flipped. The left hand, there we go. This semicircle here is the open sea, so the boundary forcing is over here, and so that's just a coarse resolution area where that is used to keep the boundary far away of the area of interest, which is this bit, which is just a simple channel connected to a tidal basin. And we put in some bathymetry to make sure that we don't get too many reflecting waves bouncing around. So it's really very simple setup. We've deliberately kept it simple so that we can do some meaningful comparisons. So also for now, we're just using a fixed eddy viscosity, so no turbulence models or anything yet. And yeah, so to compare the models, yeah, this is an example. It's the velocity field during the flood. Yeah, as you can see, the results are fairly similar, but obviously this is quite qualitative way of looking at these things. So what you can do is look at error norms, compute the difference between what you think is a reasonable solution, so that your finest mesh resolution and the solution at different resolutions. So we have resolution here at the x-axis and the error on this side, and yeah, you see both models converging pretty much at the same rate. One thing to notice is that although both models implement higher order schemes, is that it actually takes quite a while before they actually reach something that nears second order convergence. So this is just looking at the solution at one point in time, and then the other way you can look at things is just pick one location, say for instance the location of a turbine, and then look at the solution over time. So here there's an app here in the flood, so there's some asymmetry in the system. Well, if you can work out what all the colors corresponds to, you can actually see that they converge quite well to each other. And that's also what you see in this graph over here. Here I'm taking the time average, and they're slowly converging to the same answer. So that's the sort of thing you can look at purely hydrodynamics. Obviously it gets interesting if you actually look at the ecological modeling and the impact of turbines. But that means we first have to look at the implementation of these turbines. So that's what is explained in this slide. A few formulas, but it's really very simple. So the drag force in general is described by a quadratic drag law. Might be provided by the turbine manufacturer. So we have a quadratic U squared dependence. We have a cross section of the turbine and a drag or thrust coefficient that also might depend on the velocity to include rating effects and that sort of stuff. And basically what you want, you add, so here I'm looking at the case of the shallow water, you add an extra term in the momentum equation in such a way that the integrated term gives you exactly that term. And what you end up with is the term at the bottom, and if you look very closely at that, then that's basically a bottom friction term. Now one thing to keep in mind here is in this formula at the bottom, there's this fraction over here, and there is an A area at the bottom of that fraction. That area is the area over which the increased drag is applied, and that becomes important later on. Another thing to note as well is that this sort of drag force for the entire turbine depends on the upstream velocity, so the velocity that hits the turbine from upstream. Whereas in the model, typically we only have a more local velocity available. I'll get to that later. Okay, so that again, just an example of a solution. I should note this because we're not actually using turbulence models, so that the wakes are not going to be very reliable because the mixing is completely, it's not going to be right. But yeah, very similar solutions. You see velocity deficit behind the turbine, and you see locally a bigger reduction in the velocity. Okay, so this is what it looks like in Mike, the GUI in Mike. You select where you want your turbine, you just give the coordinates, and then you have your unstructured mesh. Then what happens is that turbine ends up in one cell, and because of the numerics in Mike, basically what it then does is apply that drag that we just talked about over the area of one cell. Now, the problem with that approach is that that means that the drag that is going to be applied in that cell is going to depend on that area of the cell. And as we've seen before, if that area of the cell becomes smaller, then you apply more drag, and that means that local velocity drops. The problem with that is that then that local velocity is used to compute that quadratic drag, and then you see that the applied force is actually going to decrease. So that's what's shown in this graph over here. So I've done the same implementation of fluidity just to make sure that we understand exactly what's going on in mic as well. And as you can see, with the resolution, the local velocity in the cell drops, and that local velocity is used to implement the quadratic drag law. So that's going to give you, the more resolution you put in, the smaller the force is going to be. Now, on the one hand, you actually you expect the local velocity to be smaller, because in reality you have an upstream velocity and the local velocity at the turbine is going to be smaller, and that sort of relation between the upstream and the local velocity, you can compute that using actuated disk theory. And that's the line I've set over here. And if you see where the crossover point is, that's exactly where the mesh resolution matches that of the turbine. So if you have very coarse resolution, then the upstream and your local cell velocity is not going to be all that different. So then that approach is not such a problem. If you get nearer to the turbine scale, then yeah, you get a significant drop in the local velocity, and that application of the quadratic drag law goes wrong. Now what happens then in between is basically, instead of applying the drag over the correct width, as you do right over here, is that it's applied over a wider area. And basically what you can do is take this actuated disk theory, modify it, and take into account the fact that you do apply it over a wider area. If you do that computation, shown here in red, you can actually predict pretty well what that drop in velocity is going to be. It's pretty much on top of what you indeed get out of the microfluidity lines. Right, and this is more in schematic how this works in the actuated disk theory. So instead of having a turbine that is actually the actual turbine width, we consider a width of delta y, which is the width of the cell. And that means that we basically have a cross-section here that is delta y times the depth instead of the real cross-section of the turbine. Okay, now, so if you have this, if you can derive this relationship between the upstream and the local velocity, that means you can actually rewrite your quadratic force law in terms of a local velocity, and that's what I've done here. So if you go through all the algebra, it's quite a lot of tedious algebra that I've spared you from, but this is the result that you get, and basically what you get is this extra term over here. So that's the correction that we apply. And in there there's a gamma, which depends on the thrust coefficient again, and this ratio between the actual cross-section of the turbine and the cell width and the depth. So one thing to notice is that if you actually do resolve the individual turbine, so you have mesh sizes that are of the cross-section, and you do this in 3D, say, then basically this ratio drops out, and then this gamma is just CT, and that is exactly the correction that Thomas Bock proposes in his paper of 2013. But what we propose is basically an extension of that, such that it also works if you have coarser resolutions than models where you actually resolve them. Okay, so then finally I show here in this graph. Now I display what the force is that is applied by mic and fluidity. So as I said, because in mic the velocity is computed from that local velocity, the force is going to drop actually significantly if you come close to the turbine scale. However, if you apply our correction, then that drop is significantly less and stays within the 2-3%. So that's the main idea. Okay, so then I'll wrap up. So yeah, we set up this Tidal benchmark, which we've just started with. We want to look at lots of different aspects in terms of ecology, and then I discussed this problem of representing turbines in very coarse resolution models, and how you can use a modification to this actuator, this theory, to make this a bit better, basically. So the future work, as I said, actually looking at adding the ecology. And the other thing I mentioned is that we haven't really looked at turbulence models. So at the moment we have wakes that are very unreliable. What we want to do is have comparisons with 3D results and lab results as well to make that better as well. Okay, thank you for your attention.
I think if you have any questions for Stephan, if you can catch him over. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Simon Gill. If you could make your way to the